Hello and welcome to my YouTube channel. My name is Melvin Way. I'm the one who narrates all these videos. You can find me on Google or YouTube just by searching for my name. So this is some old footage from Sweet Wormwood. It was a previous plant series where I took this big woody root ball, cut away most of the woody roots, and boiled whatever I could, plus the soft roots, for 2 hours to salvage that potting mix. I used potting mix to grow my plants, and after 2 hours, this is actually not the same footage from when I actually boil the thing. It's just old footage, stock footage at this point. So removing the brown paper on these mango seeds is optional, and I'll show you right after this one, that seed that's lying on the plate, how I first opened these. This is actually a prior attempt, again old footage that doesn't pertain to how I processed the 4 seeds that I used for this series. So the way I processed the 4 seeds, and I don't have footage of that shown in this video, is I just felt the seeds on the side, the seed coat rather, which is what I'm peeling away right now. You can see what's inside the seed with that brown paper on it, and I would just find the thin area where the seed isn't and cut a corner away, then stick my scissors inside and cut in both directions, and then I do the prying that I'm showing here right now. So you can see what these look like. That's how they generally look like. I think these were 2 Peruvian mangoes. They were smaller. The 4 Mexican mango seeds that I used for this video are bigger, and they have smaller sections of brown paper attached. But anyway, none of that's really important. All of these mango seeds that I've seen at least operate the same way and should be handled the same way. So this is day 0. It's mid-July 2017, and I'm planting 4 seeds I cut out of the seed coats. Maybe they're a little bit different from Peruvian mangoes and how easy or hard they are to extract. I was feeling around with gloves and they're all slippery and slimy, and I was just like, you know what, it's easier just to use a levered cutting implement. I have a pair of scissors that's a little more heavy duty than regular scissors that people use to cut paper. So I'm going to plant these on their sides, and they all look pale like this. I guess the Mexican mangoes are a little bit different. The brown paper is a little, it's not as prominent and not as easy to peel away. It doesn't matter though. You can see that there, I think that's the root. So these have root and shoot systems that are much more developed, at least to my knowledge, than most plants that have tiny seeds. And in this case, I'm not peeling away that paper. So there's sort of an umbilical cord, for that brown paper that attaches to the seed coat. You'll find out when you eat a bunch of mangoes and try to do what I just showed you. So I'm going to plant these 4 seeds like this, all next to each other on their side, because I'm not an expert on the orientation. In either case, if you were to plant big seeds like this vertically, and that's never how they would fall on the ground in nature anyway, except by a freak accident in very wet terrain. So I have to move some of these roots aside. It's kind of a pain. The sweet wormwood has very tough woody roots, and they're all networked. So I'm placing them on their sides because that way the roots and the shoot tips can just go directly up and down. They don't need to make a loop, whereas if I planted them vertically like I was talking about earlier, then that means one of the 2 would have a very easy time and the other would have to loop all the way around, and that's a huge distance and wasted resources. That's a few inches off the stem if you were to do that. So I cover this with about 1 centimeter or less of potting mix. I had previously failed at mango growing. Germination, actually, I never even got to seedlings. And people were like, well, you can try various methods. You can have them in Ziploc bags, use the wet paper towel method, keep them indoors for a while until you see long roots, and then do a transplant, or you can try this, directly throw them in. So I opted for the latter because in my experience, mango roots are very fragile. Despite the giant size of these things, You'll find out if you try to do a transplant that it's quite easy to break them, especially if they're unhealthy, which I think mine were, just sitting in a container and they had turned all green and whatnot. So I actually have a video that shows my failed mango germination attempt from earlier, but since you're watching the good stuff right now, you don't need to go see that unless you're just very intellectually curious about it. So I'm just sprinkling on more potting mix that's been steam sterilized as well in days past, and it was just sitting in a bin on my balcony, and I'm doing a light pat down. Don't make the mistake I made earlier, which is bury them under several inches or centimeters of potting mix and really pack it down. So I'm going to fertilize a little bit with some Miracle-Gro. I labeled it vegetative growth because there are two kinds. There's one for normal foliage general growth. I think that contains a lot more nitrogen. And then there's one that's a flower boost that you use to get better flowering and more of them. So a fraction of a scoop is fine to get things started. I would water sparingly because there are no deep roots to feed at this point, obviously. And the more you water, the deeper down all of this stuff goes. So it's just basically crystallized versions of all the compounds and the macronutrients that the plant needs to grow, that all plants need to grow. So I'm watering with just a little bit of water, and I just want to do it enough to the point where your fertilizer goes down, maybe just a few centimeters, and that way the seeds are just bathing in this rich nitrogen mixture and potassium and phosphorus and whatnot. So I think these seeds, despite having giant sizes, have woefully inadequate nutrient stores in them, and I'll talk more about that later. So it's day 13, and I was working on my balcony on something else for just an hour or so, and I looked over again when I was done with that, and I saw this. It's a beautiful red shoot that reminds me of how my avocado series started. And if you get close and parallel to the ground, you can see bulges elsewhere. I'm not sure about that corner, but I think at least 2 out of 3 of the other ones are going to sprout at some point. And this one has actually the most advantageous position for receiving the maximal amount of afternoon sunlight. So at first I decided to water just mildly to keep the top layer, the top few centimeters, top few inches wet. Then I decided I should just do more fertilization. So here are some, Target brand, generic brand of vitamins, generic of the Men's Health multivitamins that I normally eat. Those are almost twice as expensive. So I'm going to add a crushed multivitamin. This is something I started doing in 2016, last year. And I think the logic behind it is very sound. Nobody seems to have any objections to this. And it's just a fun thing to do, although it does require washing a pair of pliers once in a while. So I have an extra very fancy pair of vice grip pliers that I'm using for this. It's a nickel and chromed out, so shouldn't rust too bad, although I think I should just get a simpler pair. Consider mortar and pestle, but I think that would be a bit of work as well. There's no way around it. I mean, vitamin pills are hard. They've got a soluble case to keep everything inside, which is mostly calcium carbonate, but there's also a lot of other metals and trace minerals that animals need and plants need as well. So I'll distribute these smaller chunks around to make sure all 4 seeds are covered when I water. And then I'm going to spray we'll sprinkle on some Miracle-Gro vegetative growth again to add some more fertilizer, because every time I water, logically, the stuff that's already dissolved, if it hasn't absorbed into all these wood chips and sphagnum peat moss particles in potting mix, then it's just going to drift and diffuse further down into the potting mix. So if I keep watering from the top without sprinkling on some new Miracle-Gro, then all those nutrients will eventually diffuse or get washed down into the lower depths of this pot, where they'll be wasted because they'll be essentially inaccessible for a very long time unless the roots grow really fast. So I'm just using a mirror here to illuminate very late in the day. It's close to dusk, and the videography gets bad if it's all in shade. Although right now there's not that much to look at, so it's not that big of a deal. And if you zoom in too close anyway on something very small, then the colors tend to get oversaturated. You can't really see the green. Everything's almost white basically when you zoom in really close. So you don't have to dissolve all of the vitamin chunks. They'll dissolve over time. I just want to dissolve the Miracle-Gro crystals and get that nitrogen, potassium, and phosphorus down there so the other three seeds especially can access it. So yeah, I can replicate the videography of daytime for a small area like this using a mirror. So there's a little bit of green in there. I don't know if that's the rest of the seed. People sometimes say, several shoots or plants can come out from one seed. So this is all new to me, and I'll just wait and see what happens. And if the seed gets exposed, I'll pat it down with some potting mix. Thanks for watching. Welcome back to my YouTube channel. It's day 15, the second episode of this Growing Mango Trees from Seed series. There's been a lot of progress in just 2 days. As you can see, the leaves are unfurling. Instead of the 5 or so I thought were going to come out, I have more than that, and this stalk is nice and fleshy. It's shiny with a beautiful red sheen. It remains yet to be seen if something else is going to come out of there, but in the meantime, it looks like there's 2 shoots here, and I'm pretty sure they're from the same seed because the 4 seeds are positioned sufficiently far apart that I don't think that could have happened by some kind of freak accident of a shoot emerging from another seed all the way over here at the base of this stalk. So those are a nice green. They don't have that red sheen, and that might mean that seed is polyembryonic. I've read a little bit about this. The other 2 locations don't have anything yet, although I think there is a bulge that might come out in one of the more favorable spots if you go clockwise from this 4 position orientation, this grid. So I'm just going to water a little bit to keep the top layer of soil wet. I don't want to push the fertilizer that I put in earlier all the way down to the bottom of the pot. And let's take another look. It does indeed look like another shoot is coming out. These stalks come out green, and this seed is apparently polyembryonic, whereas the first mover is maybe monoembryonic. I'm not an expert on any of this. Perhaps there are many of you out there that are mango seed experts and mango cultivar experts. You can tell me more. It's day 17, 2 days later, and as you can see, this looks very robust. Has 2 beautiful green shiny stalks. The leaves are somewhat less rigid than in the first mover, and it does appear to have these little, for the first shoot that came out, leaves that seem almost non-functional. Maybe they're some sort of cotyledon, I don't know. I don't think they're meant to get very big. And for this first mover, I'm not sure if that's part of the seed that's still in there and because it was exposed to light became green, or is there another shoot that's about to come out at any moment now. And in the background, after this 2 days, we have a new shoot that's coming out. This one more resembles the first mover. So this is the third mover, and it's got this beautiful red sheen to its original stalk, and it looks like it might not be quite as long, although you can never tell. So there's nothing in that area yet. It gets covered sometimes by the shade of the passion fruit in the background, which looms large over everything else. So I'm taking some dried crummy potting mix and filling the gaps. I'm doing some micromanagement in the very early stages just to ensure that I get the best possible start for all of these seedlings. And this will help prevent evaporation, which is very understandably going to happen if you have a huge gap created by the sprouting movement of the potting mix by these massive shoots and seeds, which have shoot systems and root systems moving around, bulldozing all this earth away in their path. So I think with this little bit of micromanagement, it'll help conserve moisture, and in the root system. Not that I think it's a big problem, because I've been sprinkling some water to ensure everything stays wet on the first day. So we're taking a closer look, and these leaves are a little bit different from the second mover. Seems like the leaves are more rigid and they're droopy, so they're not rigid because they lack in turgor pressure or structural integrity. It's just that seed is fundamentally different somehow. So it's day 18, the day after. As you can see, I think the second mover is actually the one that may eventually be the one coming out on top, the healthiest one, whereas the other two are something slightly different. Maybe there was a different cultivar involved in this harvest. But I think, generally speaking, based on what I've read online, the polyembryonic ones are the ones you want. Those are from the original, Philippines-derived mango cultivars, which made their way to Central America, maybe Indonesian cultivars as well. And this one is very interesting because it has so many leaves coming out of it. So it's a little different from the first mover as well. So if you want fruit trees that are identical to the parent tree, obviously getting a cutting and using it for grafting is one way, or just growing it from a cutting. From seeds, you get genetic rearrangement and all these questions and origin questions about cultivars. So there's definitely something to be said for that. But this has been a very interesting series already, and I'm really excited to see what happens in the future. Welcome back to my series on growing mango trees from seeds. The two polyembryonic specimens look healthier than the other monoembryonic ones, just by virtue of having green stalks, which the other two are transitioning to but taking quite a long time. And the leaves have more turgor pressure, it seems, or they're just more upright and erect. I saw some gossamer spider webbings, single threads on some of these plants between the nascent developing leaves. I have no idea why spiders do that. It's all just going to get stretched out and destroyed by the growing plant in the upcoming days. So on the first mover, these leaves remind me of insect wings coming out of a metamorphosis. They're very rigid and wrinkled at first, but they seem to inflate very quickly and become soft. So that's my comparison. You can see a piece of dust on my middle fingernail over there. I didn't notice it at the time. I'm still at the stage where I need to cup my hand behind the subject, because the videography of small subjects like this with all that dirt and background causes the camera to lose focus very easily. So hopefully that problem will be a thing of the past within a few days. I'm fertilizing with more Miracle-Gro, just the regular kind, not the Flower Boost. I want these to get off to a great start. I am convinced that these don't have enough nitrogen and other macronutrients that they need in usable form, because the leaves are taking a while to turn green. I remember for the avocado series of 2016, which is last year if you're watching this much later after the fact, the avocado produced 6 leaves at first, and then they stayed yellow for a really long time, and they shed and new leaves came out, say another 6, and then the process would just keep on rinsing and repeating. So it's day 22. All 4 plants look healthier, but the leaves still look too yellow to me, especially on this first mover here. I'm thinking more fertilizer is in order. Haven't been really using full scoops, just flat scoops, not heaping scoops of Miracle-Gro. But this is growing leaves after all on the top, so I'd say it's still making progress. I just don't want it to shed any of these big leaves that it started with or developed in the very first few days. That would be a huge waste in energy and a huge setback. I have watched videos where other people with growing channels said, leaves need to be maintained, so they prune so many of them away to stimulate new growth. And I mean, there's some logic behind that, but I also think if a leaf is perfectly healthy and not being parasitized, it's a net asset. When the sun strikes it, it produces more energy based on the nutrients the root system absorbs and delivers up there for photosynthesis than it takes away from the system. especially the root system. So I think the goal should be to keep as many leaves as big and healthy as possible for as long as possible, and only if they're parasitized or obviously halfway dead, then you should cut them off. So here's a defect here, and I don't know if that has anything to do with the nutrition spike I provided by fertilizing earlier in this series, and maybe it just resumed growth and hence the uneven growth. But here on the one I'm claiming is the most healthy, it has two little burn spots at the ends that none of the other leaves do. The other two monoembryonic seedlings seem to have these curls at the end of their leaves. So there's obvious differences in morphology, and I fertilized a little bit more heavily. I drained, siphoned away some wastewater that was in the watering tray from the beginning days of this mango growing series to keep things drier. Thanks for watching. Welcome back to my YouTube channel. It's day 24. Everything looks a lot greener thanks to my fertilization last time, or perhaps in part just due to the genetic program of how these seedlings develop. Perhaps they're destined to become much greener after a while. I didn't fertilize on this day because I wanted to let the potting mix dry out. I've been fertilizing every 2 days, sometimes a little, sometimes a lot, and that requires a lot of water to dissolve the crystals. So there you can see I just knocked off a tiny little leaf. I was really upset with myself right afterwards. I didn't feel anything, I just noticed it visually, but if you look back at the footage, I did brush it almost at a perpendicular angle to how it's attached. However, you can see the bottom of this petiole junction between the leaf and the stem. It's a little bit yellow there, so I don't know if it was destined to just fall off like that, or did I apply too much force. This just reinforces my belief that mangoes are very fragile plants, starting from the seeds all the way until now. And I imagine the tree as an adult or sapling can't possibly be that fragile, but they're very vulnerable in the beginning. You can see this first mover is beautiful now. Not all of its leaves are a dark green, but there's definitely significant greening towards the color I want and the color we're accustomed to seeing for all my other plants, as well as what you would expect just from any orchard tree in general. So I know some of these leaves aren't the same color as the ones facing the sliding door, the back. I guess there's more chlorophyll production facing away from the sun. Haven't rotated this pot yet, but I will soon. This third mover also has new leaf primordia at the top, even though, like with the first mover and all the others, it hasn't finished growing its existing leaves, and it's also got two of those very, very thin leaves, starter leaves perhaps. I didn't think they were cotyledons, but they just seem weird. They do seem to get bigger and broader, so perhaps they can grow into full leaves. So it's day 26. My seedlings now look beautiful and healthy. Right after I took this footage, I did fertilize right at the base. I sprinkled on the Miracle-Gro right in a perimeter around their stems, and then I did some top watering in those areas to dissolve the crystals. So this third mover, actually, because I spun the pot around, it's coming along nicely. I have a feeling they're always going to be ranked in size by the same ranks because they sprouted in a different order. You know, temporally they're a few days apart, so that's why the first mover is always going to look huge compared to the rest. But I'm thinking this polyembryonic one now looks like one of the least healthy ones because it's so small, and this one on the top is kind of covering the other one. So there's a dominant, an alpha, and a beta, and I have no way of knowing which one is a clone of the mother tree. So if you have any knowledge and can differentiate just based on this high resolution video evidence, please let me know. But otherwise, I was thinking I'm just going to go with the firstborn. It's so big and it seems to have greening leaves. Pretty soon it's going to be big and beautiful, reaching for the skies, and I'm pretty sure it's going to dominate left to its own devices. So please provide some input in the comments as to which one you want to see me keep, and thanks for watching. Hello and welcome back to my YouTube channel. It's day 30. This is now the Marquee series, I feel, of 2017. The Passion Fruit Vine series did well, but this mango series has gotten off to a great start. It's very popular. So this pot is more crowded, and I'm going to remove the seed that hasn't germinated on this side of the pot first. But upon further examination, there were no ungerminated seeds. It was just the two endosperms pointing in different directions for these two larger seedlings. So I patched that up, and it's time to look at the other side. One of these seedlings is drooping badly. I don't get it. I've been watering a fair amount, not too much though, to avoid root rot. But I'm going to dig out the saggy one first and see what the deal is. The soil feels moist to the touch. It's not sopping wet, which is great. You don't want it to be sopping wet, especially not in the early phases for plants. All that's going to do is rot the roots in many cases for many species. And the stem is actually quite soft, so I wasn't sure whether it was a fungus or whatever, some kind of disease, but you can see the two endosperms attached. So it turns out I didn't have these oriented perfectly clockwise, all in the same orientation. So I'm circling where the endosperms were. I encountered those two essentially blackened walls over there. So when I fertilize over there or I water, it has to go around this giant endosperm. But let's dig this out and see what happens. I'm very curious to see why, despite the absence of any visible disease, this one is sagging so badly. Seems like it's terribly dehydrated. So I thought this was part of a polyembryonic seed. It turns out that's not the case. Pulled out this very long root. It's monoembryonic. So I'm wondering how this very long root that probably goes all the way to the water tray can't supply the water this plant needs. Some of those other roots are old Sweet Annie roots. Those have been boiled for 2 hours, so I'm amazed they're still intact. But this root is beautiful. It starts out sort of well, I think it's red all the way down. I think that paler section is just where maybe it was scratched when I pulled it out. But I don't see any plant parasites. I saw some fungus gnats actually on the endosperms eating the potting mix or the fungus within when I was excavating the other side and found nothing. But on this side, it just seems like for this healthier looking one that's not sagging, the root broke off. When I tried to pull it out, that makes no sense. The other seedling that I pulled out before this, it has that long root, and I guess I can understand why it would be a little dehydrated. If the plants drink directly from the watering tray of the self-watering pot, and I've been siphoning off that runoff, then its dependable source of water is gone. Maybe this is one of these plants that needs to burrow its taproot right away and find water deep down in the ground and drink from a water table. So I dug out, as you can see there, and from the caption, a broken off piece of root. This is definitely not Sweet Annie root. So what doesn't make sense here is the healthier upright seedling, it's not attached in any way to the other seedling. I mean, they were just facing each other, and this one has the weakened root that broke. I know mango seedlings, mango seeds are very fragile. I've touched on that subject many times in this series, but I didn't expect a healthy root system to just break off like that. So far my theory is that because these two roots, tap roots, were running in parallel, only say 2 centimeters apart from each other, less than an inch, I think they were just competing for water and nutrients, and that's why they were stunted in their growth. Whereas the other two on the other side, which I'm going to keep, and hopefully they'll reach for the skies soon, those had seeds that were pointed in opposite orientations. So they grew away from each other and faced no competition, and their tap roots weren't running parallel to these two. So that's basically it in a nutshell. I had 4 seeds. I placed them in sort of a square orientation around the pot, and the 2 that did well had the roots and shoots pointing far away from each other, so they're separated by maybe 5 or 6 inches of soil. somewhere between 12 to 15 centimeters of dirt, something like that. So they're on opposite sides, and these two small stunted ones are just monoembryotic seedlings that got off to a bad start because they were constantly fighting each other. The potting mix didn't hold as much water as I thought it would, or the roots just need to drink directly from the watering tray. So when I used my manual pump and I siphoned away all of that fertilizer runoff and extra water in the watering tray because I wanted to avoid root rot over the first month, that just deprived this seedling of its water source. And the two other remaining seedlings that I'm going to go forward with, those were getting enough water from their positions in the pot. They didn't have to compete with anything in such close proximity. I also know that some plant species do carry out chemical warfare between the root systems, and that's another explanation for what was going on. So this is just a long leisurely episode. It's 10 plus minutes where it shows me doing all this excavation work and showing you what goes on underground, and I'm just talking about all my theories. And it's time to rotate this pot for a new orientation. It's much easier now. I don't have to consider 4 plants, just 2. So a 4 out of 4 germination rate is pretty good. I'm very happy about that. I was going into this episode doing the filming and excavation thinking that I'm going to talk about how you should do multiple attempts, but it seems like if you do what I did in the introduction videos in the pilot episode, you should end up with a good result even with just 1 seed if you have the right conditions. So this one looks a little bit more yellow, I know, and I'm using that as a gauge of health, but actually in the 2 small stunted seedlings that were also monoembryonic, those didn't do well at all, and those were the greenest in the beginning. So that's not a great gauge of health. Seems like they're just genetically programmed to turn green after a while, provided you have enough fertilization. I know some people, some online sources will say the endosperm provides nutrients. It's like a battery of nutrients that will supply giant seedlings like this for weeks or even months, but I don't think that's true. I think if I didn't provide fertilization and I just watered in this potting mix, everything would have been dead or shed leaves by now. It would have been a lot smaller. So I bought a new pair of long nose pliers that's excellent for crushing vitamins. It only cost $4. That's a pretty great price. Long nose pliers are useful for many things. You can pull out staples out of junk mail and just throw the rest into your recycling tub or whatever. And just for fine manipulations of small objects that require a lot of force, instead of using your fingernails, long nose pliers are just awesome for a variety of tasks. I highly recommend everyone get a pair, and they can also remove cactus spines and things like that, although I'm very glad to report that I haven't needed to use those for, say, cholla balls or any of those purposes. So I'm applying more Miracle Grow, trying to get some around the stem, seeing how the 2 that I removed have those long tap roots that try to race for the bottom and get to water. It doesn't seem like there's a lot of lateral roots. So in this case, the fertilizer that's far away, a few centimeters even, it might not get to the plant, but it'll diffuse through the soil as I'm watering now. And I'm going to water a little bit more. During last episode, I've been filming every 2 days. This episode I only filmed on this 1 day. I just wanted to let the pot dry out previously, so I skipped on every other day watering. So it ended up being I didn't water for 4 days, but now I've watered every 2 days since then, which is really just 2 days and then another 2 days since I'm publishing all these episodes in just 4 days because progress is so fast. So I'm going to let some water sit in the watering tray and see if that perks everything up a little bit. At this point I can't tell if the leaves are going to unfurl anymore or are they lacking in water, and it could be that they're lacking in water, but at the same time I'm terribly afraid of causing root rot. So I'm just going to let about an inch of water sit in the watering tray. It'll be about half full, which is what I observed later on after I finished filming this episode. This mango growing series has gotten off to a fantastic start, and I look forward to gaining a huge following for it and a lot of new subscribers as well. Please stay tuned to my YouTube channel for further updates on this series and others. And thanks for watching. Alright, it's day 37. It's been a very rough week for the fourth born last time. If you recall, on day 30 I removed the second and third borns, thinking they were polyembryonic seedlings that came out of the same seed, but they actually weren't. I thought this bug that's on here, I don't know if that's a leafhopper or whatnot, it looked like a brown spot through the sliding door from a distance when I looked at this in the morning, so I thought this plant was succumbing to root rot. I was very worried until I saw that it was just a bug. So the fourth born has most likely succumbed to root rot. I've had many days of cloudy, foggy, cold weather, and it's been unseasonably cold for August. So that means a lot less soil evaporation and a lot less warmth. It was around 20 Celsius. Maybe even less outdoors instead of the usual 30 during the day, or even hotter sometimes. So on day 33 I siphoned off the remaining water in the watering tray. I was thinking the possibility of root rot was real, and based on these browning dead spots on the leaves, I think that's what happened here, although typically with other species I've noticed it's the edges and the tips that seem to die off, and usually they become yellow or white, not quite brown like that. So it's a different set of symptoms, and this seedling that I pulled last time that had the long red root, it died very quickly in the hydroponic setup. It looks totally gross, I know, and at first ants were using it as a bridge to get into the water and drink from that. But this endosperm dried out very quickly. The root, the bottom part that was soaked in the water, I think it's just all moldy. Basically the root system stopped functioning, and that's what caused the shoot system to wilt, in my opinion. The endosperm was already very depleted. Well, it was at least halfway depleted coming out, but it soon dried out. So my theory is that the root system somehow stops working, gets shut off, and then the shoot system wilts, and then it'll start depleting the seed. So I'm going to excavate the root system of this fourth born and see what happened. It's a real pity, but I knew eventually there wasn't going to be enough room for even both of these plants in the same pot. This is a tree after all, so I imagine after a few months, at least going into the winter, the firstborn is going to become very big. The foliage on both of these is a lot greener than it was last episode, although it still looks somewhat yellowish green compared to the firstborn. So I heard a snap. The root system on this is much more robust than the secondborn and thirdborn that I pulled a week ago. So the bottom of this broken off root is reddish, but the rest is blackened. That's sort of the same symptom of the previous ones that I pulled, in which it just blackens off and ceases to function, so water can no longer be transported. It might be some kind of fungal infection that just shuts off the vascular system of the plant. But the endosperm is very, very supple and round. It seems like a charged battery almost in comparison to what I excavated last week with the secondborn and thirdborn. So I think the plant has no reason to spend what's in the endosperm if it can get all the water and macro and micronutrients that it can and needs from the soil. So I still think fertilizing right away, right even as you're trying to germinate, is definitely the way to go. I don't subscribe to the theory that you could just grow these in sand or a nutrient-less medium with no fertilization and expect them to get to any appreciable size. I think they would do horribly, and the endosperm would just be depleted. So the potting mix felt wet and cold to the touch because this is really the first direct sun we've had in days. It's been pretty rough. I've been very worried that without the direct sun there would be non-existent soil evaporation, and therefore whatever root rot that I feared was going on in there would just be exacerbated, and that I was going to lose potentially everything. But it seems like the firstborn is doing better than ever. All the foliage is really green. It's emerald green. It's not quite as dark. The leaves aren't as thick, of course, as the passion fruit vine that looms in the background. And all my plants have basically suffered during this marine layer cold stretch with no sun. So I imagine whatever germination projects I had underway might have been delayed as well. Although I'm hopeful with an upcoming stretch of sunny, warmer and warmer days, as far as I can see on the weather forecast, will really help out with everything. So other than what's already happened with the other seedlings, this firstborn really doesn't have any problems. I don't see any signs of plant parasitism by bugs or any kind of worms in the soil. I didn't see any fungus gnat larvae this time, burrowing in and out and trying to complete their life cycle to generate yet more fungus gnats. So the foliage is all green, but I didn't really notice growth until today. Seems like the plant was in a state of stasis, possibly fighting off the causes of death for the other three, which is either root rot, either that or they've all been fighting each other through chemical warfare. That's still a plausible explanation, and this one won out. So with the last remaining seedling forcibly removed by me just now, this should dominate and grow very quickly right after this, especially with the warm days coming up. So I think things are starting to look up. The soil should dry out for another week, and then I'll evaluate as to whether I should add some more fertilizer and water again. But going forward, I definitely won't water as much as I did before, despite the growing size of this seedling, just because I don't want to have a situation where I lose it. So I'm fairly confident that things will work out. And thanks for watching this episode, and please stay tuned to my YouTube channel for further updates on growing mango trees from seeds. Hello and welcome back. It's day 43. I've noticed that flying insects love to land on my mango seedling. It must be giving off a very flavorful, pleasant aroma that they love, even though I can't imagine that there would be any similar smell in the wild that they would normally be attracted to. This is an alien plant in their environment. And on day 51, you can easily see why I didn't have an update a week ago. It's because there's no noticeable growth in the surface area of these leaves, no new leaves. They do look thicker and more mature, but there aren't any more of them. And the smallest two leaves, the newest two, one of which you can see here, don't seem to have increased appreciably in size. I don't know why everything is stuck in a state of stasis. Could be that this plant is recovering from root rot. It could also be that the positioning in the pot is not optimal. So I'm going to rectify that. First, I'm going to use a squirt bottle filled with water that has a little bit of fertilizer dissolved in it, just a fraction of a scoop of Miracle-Gro, and a crushed multivitamin in there. Figure the multivitamin concentration could be a little higher than the fertilizer and not cause problems. But as you can see, the squirt bottle is stuck because, as I later found out, there are indissolvable elements in there. So I could pour out the supernatant later after everything settles and wash out the bottle. That's not really the problem. The reason I'm doing this is because I want to provide enough fertilization to ensure that the plant gets every bit of nutrition it needs. But I don't want to overwater, which would be easily the case if I were to just use my showering can and drench everything from the top again. So a few mLs squirted in like this will travel down the base of the stem, the taproot, and get to where it needs to go without adding too much water. and I'm going to shower that off with a few mLs from the showering can of distilled water. If you use tap water, you'll get water spots on the leaves and salt up the soil eventually. For such small volumes, it doesn't matter. I mean, not in the sense of, costing yourself a lot of energy to make all that distilled water. So I've rotated this pot, and I'm hoping that this position will be better. You can see there's a dead spot there. I hope it's not a precursor to root rot. It's not a symptom. Could also just be some flying insect parasite that landed on there and transmitted a disease that killed off that section of that leaf. But this is the best position for my lemon tree series pot, which is a little bit to the left of this on the balcony. So out of 5 seedlings, this position was the best and the one where the seedling survived, so I'm going to go with that. Hello and welcome back to my YouTube channel. This is a very long awaited update to my mango growing series. I haven't updated since day 51. So this is day 59. The plant is still beautiful, but it's covered with flying insects. At any given time there are 3 or 4 of these little buggers from outside. Plant hoppers, leaf hoppers, and the like. You can see 2 right there. They're different colors. I think this small one that I'm trying to brush off that's very obnoxious and won't get the hint is a nymph maybe, or maybe it's a smaller species. So they just play hide and go seek with your finger. If you try to brush them off, they crawl to the underside of the leaf. They never take the hint and leave. I don't want to apply pressure to the leaves and try to smash anything on them. That would just cause damage, and they would just come back later anyway. So the foliage is nice, but there's no further development really. You can see some spots that have scarred over due to this insect predation, and I'm worried that they might be transmitting diseases. That's more damage than they could do physically themselves. And here you can see me trying to brush off more of these plant hoppers. So they're not going to go away, and I think I'm going to have to take more drastic measures. But other than that, the leaf foliage looks beautiful and healthy. It's just that I don't know how much of this insect predation the mango seedling can take. And eventually all the leaves will be marred. And that damage can add up over time if more and more come from the wild and decide that this is a free-for-all, a buffet for sucking the juices out of the plant. But other than that, there's not that much progress, so I think I'm going to have to rectify the situation. At this point in the series, I'm still using a squirt bottle with some dissolved fertilizer in it. I'm just squirting at the base. I'm not fertilizing too heavy. I did that earlier in the series and to start, and the weather was much warmer back then, but for all my other series, I basically stopped fertilizing. I introduced some wild California, Southern Californian dirt from the hills and the surrounding neighborhoods. But at this point, I'm still fertilizing in the old way. And this is followed by some showering with a small amount of distilled water. I didn't want to overwater early on, but I've been told that mango seedlings at least can handle a little bit more water, at least compared to citrus. So I should be good. There's no reason to change anything drastically if the plant still looks healthy. So get one last good look at this because it's never going to look this good again. Unfortunately, I'm very sad to report that by the end of this video it'll look a lot different, but there's going to be some new hope. So at this angle it's beautiful, it's lush, and then by day 74 I could already tell there's been a slight deterioration in color and quality of the leaves. They look older, more weathered. I spun this pot around to have the seedling get a little closer to the edge of the balcony to where there was more sun. I figured maybe it was in a good position to germinate earlier, but with fall approaching, perhaps it just needed more sun. I'm not sure. But as you can see here, it's not quite as green as it was before. With 2 insecticide sprayings separated by a week, I treated my balcony and all of the plants on it with insecticide spraying. The insecticide itself is quite old actually. It's a few years old. So this is day 85, and the foliage still looks better. Well, maybe it just looks better than last time because I shifted the position. I don't know, but I think the shoot apical meristem is growing. It's got a few tiny little spikes of green sticking out that weren't there before. That's a good sign. I'm also disappointed simultaneously at the fact that there's no additional growth in these leaves. I mean, some of them are small, like this one that's parallel to the ground. You know, the last leaf that grew out from the first batch, that hasn't gone anywhere in ages. And then the second smallest leaf, that hasn't really elongated or gotten any bigger. It's very puzzling. I figured all leaves would be on some kind of genetic program to just keep growing if they're receiving an adequate amount of nutrition and water and sun. So it's day 98. There's been a 3 to 4 day hot streak of 100 plus Fahrenheit every day in October. And after the hot streak was passed, I looked down my balcony and I saw that this very large leaf facing the sun had been burned to a crisp. And as you can see, there's more growth, yet more growth in the shoot apical meristem. That's very promising. However, I'm worried that this plant will befall the same fate that my avocado seedling of 2016 last season did, which is to lose all of its original first batch of leaves, spawn a second batch of leaves. In that case, it would just shoot out 6 new ones that look very healthy in the beginning, and then they would die, and then it would shoot out 6 more and eventually get depleted. This has had its first batch of leaves persevere for a very long time. So it's already been maybe 50 days since this set of leaves stopped growing. It's been very frustrating and there have been problems, but with insecticide, all the bugs on my balcony are largely gone. I still see a few ants here and there, but I'm sure they came from the outside. No more flying pests. So I'm very positive about the insecticide sprayings. I think I did maybe 2 or 3 of them, each spaced 2 weeks apart. But as you can see here, there's a seed coat, or what remains of it, brittle, leathery, and blackened. And this is the endosperm that's been completely spent, or just rotted away, or both. So much for a mango seedling just going off of its nutritive battery, so to speak, for 2 feet of growth or whatever people are claiming. So this is some Southern Californian wild dirt that I brought in from the hills. The elevation around here is about 400 feet above sea level, although it's not that far away from the coastline. So I don't have much of it. I got 1 Ziploc bag and didn't stuff it completely full. I used a hand trowel. I got some dirt from outside, but I'm figuring this will add some nutrients from the outside. It's day 122, and I got 2 more zipper bags full of wild Southern California dirt. And as you can see, although the hot streak is gone, we later had, it was a few days of a 90-degree hot streak in November. And later on, towards the end of this episode, we had a bunch of wildfires, but it was only 80 Fahrenheit to start December. So as you can see, the shoot apical meristem has grown significantly, and unfortunately it seems like these bottom leaves are programmed to die. The ones that are facing the sun are the ones that were scorched in October during that weather anomaly. So it's day 140. Shoot apical meristem is growing faster now. So on day 122, I covered the entire top of the pot and its potting mix with wild dirt, and that caked and formed a layer. It's harder to get water to percolate down there, but as you can see, there's further deterioration, bleaching of those leaves after the heat wave, even though there's been no heat waves after that. So maybe the plant is just cannibalizing whatever nutrients it can salvage from here. See, this leaf that we're turning on right now looks particularly bad. It's not mold or anything, it's just leaves being lost. And of course, the winter is approaching, As of this, it's December 6th, so it's approaching the shortest days of the year, the winter solstice, and in January it's going to get colder. Granted, it is San Diego County in California, so it's not going to freeze over or anything in all likelihood, although the weather's been very anomalous this year. So as you can see, this dying of the leaves is going to spread, I think. And this is an example of what I'm talking about, the second smallest leaf. It looks healthy, but it hasn't grown this entire time. And I'm sure if I compare this footage to the footage from nearly 100 days ago, I would say the leaves look more leathery. They're older and thicker. I'm sure for a lot of plants, especially vines, the leaves have a shelf life. They don't just sit there looking healthy and huge forever, nice and green. They age and then they get discarded by the plant. I don't know why they need to have such high turnover, but in nature, maybe insect parasites and other things or weather factors mean that the leaves aren't worth keeping for a full year or longer or perpetually. So as you can see, the shoot apical meristem is shooting out these green shoots. At first I thought the tips look a little burned. Maybe these are going to die too, but they're getting longer and they look like these tiny little green tentacles. So it's very interesting. I can't wait to see what the second batch of leaves will look like. This series needs a kick in the pants, definitely. It's been 90 days since anything really happened, and I'm sure that people are eager to see some kind of progress, but winter is approaching, so we might not see that much progress. The balcony only gets maybe 2 hours of angled sunlight in the afternoon. So thanks for watching this update, and please stay tuned to my channel for 2018. Hello and welcome back to my YouTube channel. This is another episode of growing mango trees from seeds. So my seedling looks okay at this point. It looks to be shedding its leaves. If you'll recall from earlier episodes, prior to this one, everything was going swimmingly. The foliage looked very lush. Then I went a very long time before updating, and that was the episode prior to this one, covering days 52 through 140. And not much happened, but we did get leaf primordia, a second set of leaves coming in, which you can see at the top here, at the shoot apical meristem. So that looks promising, but at the same time we're losing all these original leaves, which cause a lot of dismay. And I'm doing this fertilization trick that I've been doing since 2016, I believe, where I add a crushed vitamin pill, hopefully that adds micronutrients. It's not that the plant needs vitamins, it's that if it needs calcium carbonate, which vitamin pills are made of, or any of those trace metals, this can supply it in abundance. And also I'm going to supply some powdered crystallized fertilizer and give it a good watering and see what happens. So I'm just crushing up the vitamin pill with my pair of pliers. So a very cheap pair that I got for this very purpose. They're only a few dollars, and this one doesn't seem to rust or anything. So it's a pretty good one. So ultimately, I'm just going to go ahead and say that this may have been a mistake. All this over-fertilization, as some people say, maybe my problems, my woes are due to overcare or just micromanaging things like nutrients and watering. And regarding watering, I did way too much of that in late fall and early winter, going from 2017 through 2018, because I got a new water distiller and it was producing a lot more water. Instead of 6.5 hours to distill a batch of water, it was 4.5, which enabled days where I could do it twice. And the reason I use distilled water is because it's just pure. It doesn't have chlorine or chloramine in there to kill any microbes. I'm going to supplied these pots from the California wild hill dirt that I got in many episodes I've been covering going into the end of 2017, if you recall. So this isn't actually a lot of water, and maybe that's part of the problem, because the fertilizer is very concentrated at the top. So I have no idea whether I'm fertilizing, watering too much or too little. So this is a weather report. I haven't done this before, but it's just the Windows 10 weather app. And as you can see, this is a very mild winter. You can see 2 days of rain coming ahead. If I recall, this is me narrating, voicing over from the future, and this is in Celsius. I think those were the only 2 days we got rain in my memory for the greater San Diego County area in the winter of 2017/2018. So it's been a very, very mild winter. It's very warm, even at night compared to most other places. There's been no snow or anything, just very little precipitation. In the beginning of 2017, the California drought basically ended with a lot of torrential downpours, with some areas in the northern Sierra Nevada seeing 200 inches of rain by February, jungle levels of rain. So it's day 185, and all the original leaves are gone. I mean, physically, some of them are there, but it doesn't really matter at this point. You can see one right there. They shed, and then they blow off, like this one, because there's a lot of wind sometimes in San Diego. So they just go all over the place. Then I have to pick them up and dispose of them. But you can see all of these remaining attached leaves are on their way out. So I'm not going to bother cutting them, although I'm going to deal with these tendrils from its neighbor, passion fruit vine, which I pruned massively in the latest episode prior to this. So I don't want those coiling around and choking off my mango seedling. And I think I'm just going to spin this pot around because everything's been cleared up now on the balcony rail. There's a lot more sunlight coming in. But it's winter, so a limited amount of sunlight is received by all these plants anyway before the sun goes down below that hill. Behind that hill, you see in many of my videos, by 3:30 p.m. Pacific time. So these leaves are a lost cause. The second set of leaves coming in still look pretty fresh, but they're just not really growing. So that's a really big problem, and I'm just spinning this around to get it further away from the passion fruit vine. And I hope this little bit of extra sun will do wonders. And if not, we're going to have to do a lot of troubleshooting. Please feel free to leave comments. My channel is expanding at a rate faster than ever before, and I've never had to deal with so many comments. Sometimes I just don't have the energy to respond to everything, so I'll just like your comments and you'll see that, but I don't have time to write out a thoughtful paragraph to everyone. But I appreciate all the comments and input, and definitely appreciate and feel honored by all the traffic that I've been getting. So if I don't get back to you personally, even after a few weeks, it's nothing personal. It just means I don't have the time and energy. No offense. So it's been a while, and these leaf primordia for the second set of leaves aren't doing too hot. It seems like the tips are burning. Maybe it's because of the fertilization that I did at the beginning of this video, which would be very disturbing because I don't think there's any way I can undo that right now, even if I did a large flush of water, or can I? So if you have any comments on that, please provide some directives for what I can do to ameliorate the situation. So let's see. Yeah, mango leaf fell in here. This one was actually quite green before it detached, which is kind of worrisome because usually I expect them to become fully yellow or brown before they fall off and have this burned appearance. So there's just a lot of debris being generated by both this and the passion fruit vine, and I have to keep doing stuff like this and keep vacuuming. So otherwise than that, I haven't watered in a very long time. It's been maybe close to a month, literally 4 weeks. So I'm kind of apprehensive about how dry this is getting. The top looks really dry, but the bottom of the soil on the edge looks moist. It looks dark, and I'm wearing a glove here because digging around creates a huge mess, and then I have to touch my phone, which serves as a camera. But anyway, this is seemingly moist enough. So it's day 193, and I haven't watered any more since then. It's been another 8 days, and the situation looks dire, I'll be honest. It looks like I'm going to lose all of these leaves very soon. There's no need to cut them off because they're just going to shed in a few days, I feel. The base of that trunk looks a little white. So the trunk itself looks green and lush, but what we have here are several seemingly burned leaf primordia. They don't look as healthy as they did at the beginning of this episode. So that's really worrisome. So at this point I'm at a total loss as to what to do. I was thinking if it's over fertilized, I can just keep watering with a showering pail. Maybe do some kind of measured amount, like 1, 2, or even 3 liters, and see if that helps dilute the nutrients that are surrounding the roots of this. Or would that just drown everything? I really don't know. At this point, I'm watering just a limited amount. This is probably just 100 or 200 mLs at best, probably 100. That's not a lot at all in just the base of this trunk. So I'm hoping that there is some kind of response. If it gets worse, obviously water is not the problem. If it gets better, then maybe I should do some deep watering and then let it dry out for another month or so, and hope that that will have flushed out some excess nutrients so this thing can recover. Otherwise, it looks like I'm going to lose this and the series will end involuntarily, which would be terrible. I want this to continue and have a great 2018, but it looks like it might not happen. So yeah, just please provide some input in the comments and we'll see what we can do going forward. Thanks for watching. Hello and welcome back. It's day 196, and I did a peripheral excavation to prove that the soil is too dry. I didn't want to dig too close to the base of the stem, knowing there could be roots there. The last thing I want in this precarious situation is to break some of those precious roots, although in my experience from the past it seems like there's only a tap root going pretty far down. So perhaps there wasn't that risk of breaking lateral roots that are fine. I'm not quite familiar and experienced enough with mango growing to know what the root system looks like in the seedling years up to the sapling years. So I'm just going to put this back. It's noteworthy that that wild California hill dirt congeals with the top and forms plates like what I just showed you. And by doing this, I've caused a minimal disturbance, but it looks very dry. Just from the coloration alone, it is a little dark, but I can't feel any wetness. By lifting the pot and later out of sight of the camera, lifting with both hands, I discovered that the pot was nearly bone dry, much like these other 2 pots from recently terminated plant growing series. I forgot at the moment which 2 plant series those were from, but those pots were very dry as well. I dug in there a little bit. So I'm doing this watering regimen. Last time, at the end of the last episode, if you'll remember, I used a squirt bottle to add some distilled water at the base of the stem. And that's a very small trickle, about 100 to maybe up to 200, probably just 100 mLs of water. And that seemed to have produced somewhat of a response. I saw some new development in the buds. I know all of these leaves are goners. So knowing that the soil mass is very dry, just a few days after the last episode, the end of it, I'm doing this watering routine. I don't want to soak the entire soil mass. I just want to keep watering directly where it is, around the general area of the base of the stem. And that way, if there's excess moisture, it should be absorbed by the rest of the soil mass that's dry, far away from the plant where I was excavating basically. So I doubt that in this first watering I'll soak the entire soil mass. Should take a while. So it's day 200. There are new bud developments at these nodes, so that gives me some hope. They look pretty nice. So I'm thinking at any moment now there's going to be new growth, new leaves, and maybe even new stems eventually shooting out. That one looks promising. It's a little low on the stem, but any help would be welcome at this point. You know, if these 4 or 5 buds grow into new leaves, I'd be ecstatic. But it's taking a long time, and I'm hoping that the watering will help, because I really don't have any other clues at this point. I don't have anything to go off of. Many people have offered conflicting advice or different advice. So in the meantime, I'm just going to prune off these dead leaves. They're very unsightly, and yeah, basically that'll make things a little bit more aesthetic, get more sunlight to the stem where the buds are growing directly on those nodes, you know, right above the dead petioles, or soon to be completely stiff and dried out petioles. So that's really all I can do for the time being to improve the aesthetics and get a little bit more sunlight to the stem. It's day 209. I'm going to continue doing what I was doing, which is not much, just watering twice a month or once every 2 weeks about. So these buds look like they're coming along nicely. I expect leaves to come out anytime, any day now, but it is winter in 2018. So the weather is cold still, and the days are very short. This balcony receives maybe only 2 hours of direct sun a day. Not much at all. It looks completely charred up there, and as you can see, there's a little bit of a cobweb situation. I didn't see the spider, but that's generally not a good sign, because it means that there are bugs infesting your plant, and I can't even see what it's being infested with. It just looks completely charred up there, which one viewer said may be due to this plant receiving too much sunlight. But it's winter, as I said, and it receives maybe only 2 hours a day tops of mid-afternoon indirect sun. Well, no, it's direct sun, it's just angled. So the soil is looking very dry again. I'm going to go ahead and water. The stem still looks pretty healthy. It's a nice green, except for the very top. So I'm just going to do this again. I did water a little bit at the far edge, but as you can see, I'm just going to mostly water at the base of the stem and just let it soak all the way to the bottom. I'm not going to fill up the watering tray of this self-watering pot. I'm just going to keep watering until I see a little bit of water drip out into that tray, so I can show you later, and then I'll stop. So that's basically what I'm going to be doing once every 2 weeks. And I'm reflecting natural light in there using a mirror. As you can see, it's not full. It has a little bit of water there, along with particles of potting mix that have fallen through. So that's it, and the soil will stay wet for quite a while. So I'm just going to reorient that and give you a different look to show that there's no water accumulating in there, and the soil mass will dry out over the next 2 weeks until I water again. I'm hoping that this is neither too little nor too much water. So it's day 220, and this revival is taking forever. It just doesn't seem to be doing anything at all. I know it's cold, it's winter, this isn't receiving much sunlight, but enough is enough. I thought this would have had nascent developing leaves of at least some visible size, but they're just buds. That's all I see, buds, buds, buds that don't do anything, and the top looks like it's been burned with a Bunsen burner or cigarette lighter. So that's basically it. This may have been the third watering, and by day 239 I had to admit to myself that it looks like this series is over. That bud looks like it still may do something, but the top has definitely burned to a red crisp. Kind of an interesting way to burn them. Usually plants just turn brown, or maybe some kind of shade of yellow. And by day 242 it's time to just move on, because it's been so long, and as you can see, it's hollow in there. So I'm going to dig in there and pull out the taproot And for those little plants in there, I have a new plant series that's ongoing, and hopefully that'll be a nice new first episode to add to my channel pretty soon, in maybe April, when I have enough footage collected. So it's kind of hard to reach down there and find a good spot of leverage or traction to pull that out. The taproot is pretty tough for these plants. It goes in all the way to the bottom. So first I had to dig away some of that other soil without disturbing the developing seedlings from my upcoming plant series. And with a little bit of effort, I managed to yank that taproot, or what was left of it, out. I'm sure when the plant was healthy it was a lot bigger, and I'll just put everything back. So that's a minimal disturbance. I'm pretty glad, actually. I was worried that by pulling that hard I was going to turn everything inside out, and then that would disturb the seedlings you see nearby. So let me just dust that off and I'll show you in depth what these look like. So we have the root system and the shoot system. The taproot doesn't really seem to exhibit any lateral roots, fine roots coming off of it. Maybe everything brought it away. And this is the base of the shoot system. It looks hollow there. Looks like everything brought it away. So I'm not really the expert here. Most of my viewers are much more experienced. Maybe some of you in the comments can tell me what you think of the situation. In any case, I think it's better to let the viewers decide what really happened, because I'm not experienced enough and it's not really conclusive. It's just a one-off. I did start with 4 seedlings, but 3 of them quickly died in this series. And the taproot doesn't really seem to have bugs on it or anything. It seems like maybe some fine roots came off it, but they look very dry and shriveled. So whether this plant died from dehydration or bugs or some kind of infection, I don't know. But I will say that the ease by which the root system snaps shows that it died first. The cause is unknown, but the root system, having died 2 to 3 months ago, would have definitely killed off the shoot system eventually. It cannot regenerate new leaves because of that. As you can see, there are juices inside. So thanks for watching my mango growing series. Due to the massive popularity of this series, I'll try again at some point. Thanks for watching, and please stay tuned to my YouTube channel.